A reading from Mark 12:41 through 44. Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions, for they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on."
Well, good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. This is for those of you who are new. I'm Mike. I'm one of the pastors here. We're going to be doing something a little new or different. It's not new, but it's different this morning. If you're newer to our church, every year we do, kind of like a state of the church type deal. Typically, I do that after second service, and it's a sort of stay if you're interested kind of thing. And no one stays. So today we decided with everything the church has been through over the last several years, and especially, rolling out a potential building project in November or whatever, it's probably just better, let's just leverage a Sunday morning and talk with everybody about sort of the state of the church. So this morning's going to be a little kind of like a state of the church address. So it won't be a typical sermon, or at least a typical sermon for me. We're going to be talking a little more about us and the church than we talk about Jesus, which is not normal. We normally would talk about Jesus. I'm going to share some stats, some information that I wouldn't normally share. Our resident math teacher was frustrated with me that I did not include more graphs and tables. I'm sorry for that. But I'm going to include some data that I wouldn't normally include. So that'll feel a little more like a report than a sermon. But this isn't going to be a typical state of the union address either, for a couple of reasons. One, I'm not going to take credit for all of our successes and blame all of our failures on a previous administration, which everyone does, doesn't matter. Two, I'm going to be honest with you. So where I feel like the state of our union is strong, I'm going to tell you why. And where I feel like it might not be so strong, I'm going to tell you why. So I'm not going to, tell you the state of the union is strong when it's burning down around us, okay? But three, there's going to be a point to it, which is to say, I think as I meander my way through some of these reflections, it's still going to feel like a sermon, right? At the end of it, there's going to be something that I think all of us hopefully will walk away going, oh, okay, that benefited me, right? I grew in my spiritual life here a little bit because of what we talked about this morning. Okay, so that's kind of where we're going. So I want to start with some data, some numbers, some metrics. Of course, I want to start with the metrics that give the appearance that the state of the union is strong, because that's where you've got to begin. So a couple things for you to know. One, in 2022, we saw our average in-person church attendance jump from 140 people to 180 people per week. That number went up to 230 people per week when we went back to 2 services in October. And since the start of this year, since January 1st, it's gone up above 240 people. And that includes 75 to 100 kids every week. So if you haven't been around our church for a while, that's actually slightly larger than our pre-pandemic attendance engagement numbers, which is encouraging because most churches have seen significant declines in their attendance and engagement in the last 4 years. I'm talking 30 to 50%. So the fact that our church is as large or a little larger in terms of average attendance as it was in 2019, that's an encouraging thing. So that's a sign of health, I think. More and more people seem to be taking up the call to serve one another, right? One of the marks, I think, of a healthy church is fewer and fewer people are just showing up to consume something, but are actually taking the initiative to care for one another. There's a part of me that thinks the day and age when you just showed up to church to consume something, like that church is probably dead, or it's dying a quick death. Like the only church that's going to be around 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years from now are going to be people who are actually engaged serving one another. And we've seen more and more people doing that. I think we added 4 people to our music and tech team. We added 21 people, I think, to our family ministry team. We added 27 people to our Sunday hospitality team. Well, of course, we've got a lot of people that serve and engage in non-Sunday ways as well. We got a whole army of people who make meals if you add a child to your family. We've got people who take care of the building and the property. I don't know if you knew this, but on Christmas Eve, we had a water main break in our kids' area. It was like a flood zone back there. And there were people who came to church for Christmas Eve, and instead they rolled their, pant legs up and, one guy was wearing a suit, undid his tie, and he was back there, vacuuming up water. So we've got people who take care of our building. We've got people who host meals for people who lose their loved ones. We've got people who serve in all kinds of ways, and that's a really encouraging sign, I think, of health and strength for a church. A lot of people are taking up that call to serve. You know that we kind of brand ourselves as a vocational school here. We're learning love by learning God who is love. So consistent with that identity, we've established or adopted a kind of a trimester learning cohort model. That's how we do small groups here. We call them formation groups. We had 96 people last year sign up for formation groups, which is a pretty healthy percentage of our overall population. Like it or not, if you want to grow in your faith as a Christian person, you're going to have to step into rooms outside of Sunday morning. It's just the way that it's going to go. And more people seem to be accepting that invitation to do that. So that's an exciting thing. We've got some ministry teams here at the church, one that goes to Cherry Street Mission Ministries every month to spend time with people experiencing homelessness. We've got a group that goes down to Story Point just down the road here to spend time with people, with the residents there. We've got a food ministry. It's not ours, but it's a separate organization that operates out of our building, the Anthony Wayne Community Food Ministry, and a kind of subsidiary program that packs food bags for Anthony Wayne school community families who need food assistance over the weekends. We saw a bunch of people join those teams to go and be with and serve people in those areas. I think this is one of our areas of weakness right now. It's not, that's probably too strong a word, but this is a place where we need to put a lot of effort, I think, in the coming years. That really starts, I think, though, with people in the room. Like someone in the room is sitting here going, you know what, I have a real heart for, name your people group, right? Man, I have a real heart for junior high and high school kids. I have a real heart for women who have been trafficked. I have a real heart for people who have suffered from addiction. I have a real heart for people who have been incarcerated, right? I have a real heart for people who experience food insecurity, right? If you're in the room and you're thinking that way, come and talk to me or talk to a member of our staff. We would like to put a ministry team around that passion that God has put in you to go and be with and serve people in the community. So the fact that more people have moved in that direction is a sign of health. I think we got a lot of work to do in that arena or in that department. So we'll focus a lot of our time and energy there in coming years. You might be surprised to know that in 2022, we had 215 new people attend our church. So one of the, if you live in this world, one of the signs of church health is that you have as many new people visit your church in a year as you average attend your church every week. So the fact that we had 215 new people show up to our church in 2022 exceeds the average attendance per week. That's a sign of health, especially since a lot of those folks showed up because they were invited by somebody who already goes here, which is always an encouraging thing. And a lot of them kind of went through the process of starting to call this church their home, right? And that's an encouraging thing. So I'm excited all about that. Of course, numbers don't tell the whole story, and often numbers don't tell the most important story. You need to know, if you don't know this already, we don't measure success by number here at Waterville Community Church. We measure success by story, anecdotes, narratives. We're looking for stories of people who are doing things maybe that they otherwise wouldn't have done because of how God's impacted their life. Or we're looking for stories of people who are doing things they always did, but now for vastly different reasons. Looking for stories of ways that people's lives with God have been impacted, right, by their involvement in and through the church. We had somebody who started coming to the church for the first time last year, mentioned to one of our staff people, said something to the effect of, we're really enjoying coming to the church. It's filling holes in our lives that I don't think we even knew were there. And that's a testimony to okay, that's what the church is here for. But the church is here to connect people to God. And it seems like we're incrementally doing that. So by all of those metrics and anecdotes, it feels like the state of the union is strong. Okay, So that's good. I'm encouraged by that. I think we're in a healthy place. I think we're moving in healthy directions. There's one metric that tells a slightly different picture, not quite as rosy, and that's our financial situation. I know if you're new here, this is your first time to church, like, okay, here we go. He's going to talk about money. It always happens every time I come to church. Unlike the fact that we've seen kind of slow incremental growth in some of these other areas over the last 4 years, we've seen the opposite in terms of giving to the church. Over the last 4 years, we've seen giving to the church decrease incrementally each year. So 2022 was actually the worst financial year the church has had in the 12 years that I've been here. Now, I think one of the big reasons for that, and it might explain the whole thing. There's so many variables, it's hard to know, which is why talking about this sort of thing, there's like 1,000 ways to offend people. But I think one of the explanations is the pandemic really changed the nature of our church. I mean, demographically. So our church is as large numerically or larger than we were 4 years ago, but we're different. So for instance, in 2019, we had 178 families that were financially contributing to the church. Today, that number is more like 145. So we have more people attending the church, or more families attending the church, but we have fewer families giving to it. And of course, depending on which families you're talking about, one family that goes might be in a position to give more than a family that comes. So it's not apples to apples. And that's just the reality of church life, right? We're on a journey together, and over time, season by season, the demographic of a church, the population of a church changes. And as that demographic changes, it has material impact on the life of the church. I've got a colleague here in town who's been pastoring the same church for 30 years, and he would tell you that he's pastored 5 churches. Because just over the course of that 30-year period, the demographic has changed 5 times. Just different churches. And as you have different populations, that's of course going to have material impact. So one of the encouraging things that we've seen in the last couple of years is longtime members here, partners here, have increased their giving, which has been really necessary and has been a blessing. It's been incredibly helpful. And I think, as I stand here, like I'm perfectly optimistic because all of the other metrics seem to be tending in a healthy direction. I look at our financial reality and I say, if we keep doing what we're doing and these other things continue to trend the way they're trending, financial reality will be fine. Now, that being said, I think at least one of the reasons we've seen a positive trend in some of these other things, like showing up to church and serving and taking initiative to grow in your faith and participating in ministry groups, all these things that I've already mentioned. I think one of the reasons we've seen positive trends in that direction is because we've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years talking about what motivates us to do these things. Why, as Christian people, do we do things like show up for church on Sunday, or take the time to serve one another, or sign up for a group to grow in our faith, or certainly to give financially? What primarily motivates us to do any of those things? That's what I want to talk about this morning. I'm going to leverage this practice of giving as a way to have that conversation. It's not about giving, and it's not about money. It's about this larger, more important conversation about what motivates us as Christian people to do anything that we do. So I want you to reflect for just a second on the act of financial giving. Why do we give? Why do we give to anything? It seems to me that in our world, and you can just answer this for yourself, most of us have just come to accept that the primary reason, if you give to anything, that the primary reason you give to anything is to get something done. You're trying to solve a problem, achieve a goal, make a difference, right? That's why we give. We're giving to make a difference. There's something that we want to see happen. And you can sort of diagnose this. You probably, if you give to anything, you probably give to either individuals or organizations that are important to you, which is to say they are engaged in work that you think is important in the world and you think needs to be done. And you probably are giving to individuals or organizations that you think do the best job at that work. meaning you don't want to waste your money on people who aren't getting the job done. Because giving is about making a difference. So you're going to give to the things that you think are important, and you're going to give to the people who are doing the best job or making the greatest impact in the arenas that you think are most important. I think most of us have just come to accept that that's principally what giving is about. And we know that because the people who give the most money are always the heroes, because they're the ones making the greatest difference. They're the ones that any organizational lead is out courting. I read an article the other day. Ohio State received its largest single financial contribution in the history of the school. I'm sure that the exact same day that they received that gargantuan contribution, someone also wrote them a $25 check. They didn't write an article about that. Because the person who wrote the $25 check is not the hero. Because the $25 check is not going to help Ohio State do anything. Most of us have just come to accept that giving is principally about getting something done, solving a problem, achieving a goal, making a difference. But if that were true, if that were principally what giving were about, then the rich people in the story that you heard just a moment ago would be Jesus' heroes. Right? Their super large gifts were certainly more important to the temple than the poor widow's copper coins. I mean, those big bags of money were going to keep the lights on, pay the priests, fund the food program. What exactly was the temple going to do with 2 copper coins? You should expect, if giving were principally about getting something done, you should expect Jesus to look at his disciples. I mean, he takes the time. He takes the time to pull his crowd together, like, hey, gang, look at this. I got to teach you something. Something's going on here that you would not otherwise have eyes to see. I need to teach you something. If giving were principally about getting something done, then the biggest bags of money are the most important. And Jesus would look at his gang and he'd say, look at how impressive those people are. Look how generous they are. They must really care about they must really care about the mission. They must really care about God. But the rich people in the story are not Jesus' heroes. The poor widow is. You got to ask why. Why is the widow Jesus' hero? Because religiously motivated giving, so for our sake, Christian giving as a Christian person, is not principally about getting something done. It's not principally about making a difference. I want you to consider the fact that in the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament, the most common offering was called a burnt offering. People came to the temple with their bulls, lambs, rams, and goats, gave those animals to the priest, and the priest would chop them up into little pieces and light them on fire. Now, to the degree that bulls, lambs, rams, and goats were forms of currency in the ancient world, and they were, that would be like you coming to church every week, and instead of us saying, hey, if you're interested in making a financial contribution to the church, you can go to www whatever, or you can put your gift in the wooden box on the back wall. We said, okay, now's the time when you're all going to get out of your seats. You're going to walk up front. You're going to lay your money in a giant burn pile, and we're going to torch it. Why would they do that? If we did that, we would all look at that and go, what a waste. Oh my gosh, do you know what we could have done with all that money? There's hungry people, and we could have solved so many problems. Because giving is about making a difference. It's about solving a problem. It's about getting something done. But if that were the case, then the rich people who dropped the big bags of money would have been Jesus' heroes, but the widow was. And that's because principally, we're not motivated to give in order to make a difference, at least not out there. We're principally motivated to give, just like we're principally motivated to do anything, as an act of worship. It is an expression of gratitude and trust. The people who brought their bulls, lambs, rams, and goats to the temple, their story says that they brought the best of what they had, right? The first fruits of their harvest. They brought it to the house of the Lord, but they gave it to the Lord. They didn't give it to the temple. They gave it to the Lord. And the reason they gave it to the Lord, the story says, was because their hearts were moved to offer. Their hearts were moved to offer. Moved by what? Not to keep the lights on, not to pay the priests, not to fund the food program. Their hearts were moved to offer out of worship. The story specifically says that what motivated them was the recognition that they'd been rescued. They gave their offerings to the Lord because the Lord was the one who rescued them from Egypt. Literally, everything they did was supposed to be an expression of gratitude to and trust in the God who'd rescued them. When they brought their bulls, lambs, rams, and goats, it was their way of saying, thank you, God, for rescuing us, and we trust you to keep rescuing us. That's why the widow's the hero. I mean, by comparison, her gift is insignificant. It's not going to get a lot done. It's not going to solve a lot of problems. But from Jesus' perspective, it was an authentic expression of gratitude and trust. It was an act of worship, which is what it's about. That was the thing he was trying to get his gang to see that they otherwise would not have had eyes to see. What he's telling them is that by giving all she had, and you need to understand that phrase, all she had, does not mean all she had ever had or all she would ever have. It is not saying she zeroed out her bank account and had absolutely no idea where the food was coming from tomorrow. It probably meant something like she was giving all she had to live on that day, that week, that month. And by giving all she had instead of keeping it, she was doing a couple things. She was saying to God, everything I have is from you. All of this. It's all from you. Thank you. Thank you that I have it. It was also an expression of trust. It was her way of saying, you promised that I would always have what I need. Look, here I do. I'm going to give it now, and I'm going to trust that tomorrow you will make sure that I have what I need, just as you have promised and just as you have always provided. She was putting her money where her mouth is, so to speak. The rich people, despite the fact that their gifts were very large and impressive, were not. I think that's what he's trying to point out. Yes, they were big gifts, and that would be super important to the temple, I would think. But what Jesus is trying to point out is just because the gifts are large does not mean that they are expressions of gratitude and trust. They were giving large gifts, but their large gifts were actually very little relative to their capacity, relative to what they had, is what Jesus points out. And I want you to think about that. Giving a gift that's numerically large, but very little relative to what you have, isn't exactly a genuine expression of gratitude. It would kind of be like you writing a thank you note to someone who had saved your life. Technically, it expresses thanks. And if someone saves your life, it's not like you can repay them, and you're not trying, but you could try, right? I mean, you understand the difference between expressing thanks in a way that will never fully capture your gratitude, but at least it's genuine. Right? Writing a thank you card to someone who put their life on the line for you doesn't quite get it done. It is not exactly a genuine expression of trust either. Can you imagine if a billionaire were to write $1 million check and say, God, I trust you with my well-being? I would love if a billionaire came to our church. I would love it if a billionaire were to write $1 million check, right? We could do the building project. That'd be great. That would be really helpful. But that does not mean it would be an expression of gratitude and trust for that person. And I would be an awful pastor if what I cared about was building brick and mortar, but not building people who worship. What do we need the brick and mortar for otherwise? It's a little disingenuous to say, God, here's $1 million. I trust you with my well-being, while you're still sitting on $999 million. That's the point. That's the point that Jesus is trying to make. Giving is not about getting something done, principally. It's not about making a difference. It's supposed to be an expression of worship, an act of gratitude, and an act of trust. That's why we do it. It's why we do everything else. Why do we come to church every Sunday? I mean, if I were to ask you that question, and I've asked a lot of people that question over the last 3 years, it's one of the reasons we kind of launched on this topic. Because if I asked the question, people would say things like, well, I come to church because it's important. Or I come to church because I want to learn about God. Or I come to church because I want to meet Christian friends. Or I come to church because, I think it's valuable for my spiritual life. All of those are wonderful reasons. Those are wonderful reasons, as we just talked about in our last series. Most people engage religion and spirituality, at least initially, for self-interested reasons. That's important. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, those are supposed to become secondary reasons, kind of ancillary benefits. As an analogy, if I get invited to a birthday party, I don't go to the birthday party because they're having pizza and cake. I love pizza and cake. I'd be excited to go to the birthday party because I would get to eat pizza for lunch instead of a salad. That's an ancillary benefit for me. I would love that. But that's not why I'm going. I'm going to celebrate the person whose birthday it is. That's why we come here. We don't come here because we get something out of it, although I certainly hope we do. We come here because it's the Lord's day. It's like the Lord's birthday party. It's not Mike's day. It's not Gary's day. It's not Tom's day. It's not Ann's day or Susan's day. It's the Lord's day. So we take 1 hour. We take 1 hour out of one day that's been given to us as a gift, and we come here so with our brothers and sisters, we can say to God, we love you. We are grateful to you for all you have done, and we trust you with our lives. Showing up, serving, growing in our faith, participating in ministry, and the act of financial giving, all of it is supposed to be motivated by gratitude and trust. They're expressions of gratitude and trust. And they are essential in developing a life of gratitude and trust. See, it isn't about showing up once a week and doing these things. It's that by being together once a week and doing these things, it cultivates in us a different kind of life. Your whole life, my whole life is supposed to be about gratitude and trust. Not just my church attendance, everything. Every decision I make, how I engage my kids, how I engage my spouse, how I engage my neighbors, how I do my job, how I spend my money, right? How I handle investments, how I think about conflict, how I think about my future, all of it is supposed to flow naturally. Christian faith, at the end of the day, is supposed to be super easy to understand, really complicated to do. It should be so simple to get that a kid can understand it, but so hard it will take you your whole life to get good at it. It's so simple. You have a God who loves you. That is the truest truth there is. There is a God whose nature is love, and you are the recipient. You are the product of God's loving nature. And all of life is simply supposed to be a loving response to that. It's not hard to understand. You have a God who loves you. You love in return. This is the frustrating thing to get our kids to understand. You have parents who love you. Why won't you just love us back? Why won't you think about us before you make that decision? It takes a lifetime. Like, part of being a grown adult is before we make a choice, we think, there are other people in my life who love me, and I claim to love them. That should probably influence what I do right now, right? It's that simple. It is that simple. You have a God who loves you, and everything we do is in response. We love because God first loved us. It's not complicated. It is hard to do, and it takes a lifetime of practice practice. That's why we show up. It's why we show up. It's why we serve. It's why we give. All of that are worship practices that shape us in certain ways. You know, I've been a coach for a long time. You spend a lot more time practicing than you do playing, because it takes so much time and effort to build into players the kind of muscle memory so that when they get into the competition, they're not thinking about it, right? It's just become second nature. They're just reacting. They're playing. It's natural. It's effortless. It's similar. We come, we share, we serve, we sing, we pray, we give. All of those things are about building the muscle memory of gratitude and trust, so that when you leave this place and you go out into the world, you're just grateful, trusting people. And then every decision you make is filtered through gratitude and trust. That's what giving is about. This message isn't about money, and it's not about giving, and it's certainly not about drumming up financial support for the church. It is about worship. What motivates you to do anything? Conversations about giving in Christian churches always get bogged down in the question of like how much you should give. It's a secondary question. You can't even get to the question of how much you should give until you answer the question why you give in the first place. If giving is about getting something done, then whether or not you give or how much you give is always going to be relative to the need or the ask. If you don't think there's a need, you're not going to give. If someone hasn't asked you, you're not going to give. Or you'll give as much as you think there is need. Which is sort of analogous to like, well, if as long as the church, as long as I'm meeting Christian people or I'm learning about God or, you know, my kids are having a good time, then we'll go. But if I can get those needs met elsewhere, or if this church stops meeting those needs, then we'll stop going. But if giving is motivated, if it's an act of worship, then the need or the perceived need, or whether or not you were asked, or what everybody else is giving, or heck, even what they do with the money, those are all kind of secondary concerns. The only question that you and I have to ask ourselves, it's an easy question to ask, it's a very difficult question to answer, is what's the number for you that represents authentic gratitude and trust? You are the only person who will know. It's a scary question. What's the number for you relative to what you have, relative to your capacity? What is the number for you that represents authentic, genuine gratitude and trust to the God who has loved you? If you've never had to ask the question, is God, before giving to something, if you've never had to ask the question, is God really worth this? You probably haven't hit your number yet. If you've never had to modify some other practice in your life, some other financial behavior, if you've never had to go without something you otherwise could have had, you probably have not hit your number yet. I don't know what your number is. It's a really challenging question, but that's the issue, because it gets to the heart of it. Gratitude and trust. This is not about giving, it's not about money, it's about worship. I am firmly convinced, I think our church is in a healthy place, I think it's moving in a healthy direction. But if the state of the union, if the state of the church is going to remain strong, this is where we're going to live and die, is whether or not we are people who deeply understand and appreciate the love and the mercy and the rescue that we've experienced in Jesus. And in response to that love and mercy and rescue, are we people who are responding authentically with gratitude and trust? See, if we're becoming those people over and over and over again, everything will flow from that. The church will remain a strong, life-giving place for you and for anybody else who chooses to come through our doors. And that's what's important, is that we're becoming people who are flourishing because we've found our place with God. that we love because we first been loved. We're worshiping people. So let's finish this message and this service by worshiping. Right? The sacrament of communion, which we're going to take in just a second, is an act of worship. In just a second, I'm going to invite you to come forward and you're going to take elements, bread and juice that represent the broken body and shed blood of Jesus. They are a weekly reminder to us that the God you believe in is a God of perfect, unfailing love, a God who breaks his own body and sheds his own blood for the people that he has created. There is no other God who does that. You got the corner on the market there. That God is a God of love, and it is something that you and I need to be reminded of week after week after week. It is something that we will forget. That your God loves you. It is the truest truth that you can build a life on. But when you take the bread and the juice into your system, you're also engaging in an act of participation. You're not just saying, thank you, God, I trust you, God. You are entering into that God's life. You're becoming part of what God-likeness is in the world. You're going out into the world to be grateful, trusting people. Not entitled people. Not people who feel like they've got to grab whatever they can grab just to sort of secure themselves. But people who are going to be open-handed, open-hearted, grateful, trusting, right? You can use your resources to be a source of life and love to others, not stingy, right? Trying to save and safeguard yourself. That's what the church is supposed to be. That's what coming here every week is supposed to cultivate in us. I hope it does that in you. In just a second, I'm going to invite you to stand. I'm going to dismiss you starting in the back rows. You'll just come down the center aisle. Our communion tables are here on the sides of the stage. You'll take a prepackaged communion cup and you can go back to your seat using the side aisle, and then you can take that during this last song as you feel led. Our communion table is open. It's open to everybody. If you're here and you're new for the first time here, and you're sitting there and you're going, I want to be a grateful person. I want to be a trusting person. I want to be grateful to God. I want to trust God. I want to follow Jesus. I'm not real sure what that means, but I think I want to do that. Then come forward. Come be a part of the church. Come be a part of the believing community that's trying to be worshiping people who are grateful and trusting. You're invited. Come with us. Okay. All right, let's stand. Let me pray. God, we thank you that we thank you for who you are. We thank you for who you are and what you've done, for creating us and sustaining us and blessing us and providing for us and rescuing us, for being a constant source of love and care and grace and mercy and leadership and guidance. Thank you that our whole identities can be rooted securely in your great love for us and who we are as your children. We want to be grateful to you. We want to trust in you for our very life. Continue to help make us into those kinds of people as we gather and as we engage in the practices of worship. We love you. We thank you in Jesus' name.
You've been God for a long time. You're the final word, you're the finish line. Everything's gonna be alright. 'Cause you've been God for a long time. You've been God for a long time. You're the final word, you're the finish line. Everything's gonna be alright. 'Cause you've been God for a long time. And I will trust you in the famine. I will bless you in the feast. When I'm standing in your victory, when I'm on my knees, I will praise you with the rising and the setting sun. You're gonna catch me singing when the springtime comes. You're gonna catch me singing when the springtime comes. You're